Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here. This is the public presentation on the Winter Island Park Pathway and Bank Stabilization Project. If you could go to the next slide, please, Christian. So I'm Neil Duffy. I am the Director of Sustainability and Resiliency for the City of Salem. This project, as the name describes, is a project to stabilize and restore the bank and pathway at Winter Island Park. It's a Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management, or Mass CZM, funded project. The city received a 2-year coastal resilience grant, and this is the first year. The project partners are the city of Salem, Salem Sound Coast Watch, who are joining us, and you'll hear from them tonight. Wilkinson Ecological Design, who are leading the design work and alternatives analysis for us. PAL, which is Public Archaeology Laboratory, doing the archaeological and historical work. You'll be hearing from them, as well as Epsilon Associates, who are not with us tonight, but they're providing consultation on the permitting that's necessary for this project, of which there is some. So tonight we're going to talk about the background of the project, the condition of the park, some of the historical and archaeological significance, the restoration work, generally, what's being proposed and in what areas, and some of the permitting requirements, as well as some of the community engagement that's going to be coming up, and we'll be opening it up for questions. As this is a Zoom webinar, we will be doing Q&A through the Q&A on Zoom. So if you have questions, you can type them in the Q&A. If they seem simple and straightforward, some panelists may try to answer those in writing as others are presenting, but we probably will hold those questions till the end. But we'll take it as it comes. And if we go to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Barbara Warren from Salem Sound Coast Watch.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad you could attend, and I've been looking at who's participating, and I think many of you know and love Winter Island Park as we do. It's a local and a regional resource, but since this is being recorded and we are trying to reach a broader community, I'd like to just take a minute to go over some of the recreational resources that are available to Salem residents and non-residents of all ages and abilities. So right now, if you go out there, the RVs are there and people are setting up tents, even though there's a nor'easter coming. And that's the picture over on the left, the bottom left. The orientation is north is on the south, so, or on the bottom of that photo. The next photo over, you're seeing the large parking lot, Fort Pickering, the rain garden, the Winter Island Rain Garden. And people go there just to have a wonderful time, sit on the benches, look out at the beautiful Salem Sound, or go to the beach on a hot summer day. So it also has the historic fort and buildings that we'll hear about this evening. It has a state-owned boat ramp, a state-financed pier, a community sailing program, and it is used heavily by Salem Sound Coast Watch. We bring all the 7th and 6th graders and probably some others as well from Salem to explore the resources there, tide pools, seining, going out on a boat into Salem Sound. The picture on the left is people seining, and then students studying water quality from the moat and comparing that to the ocean, and then volunteers coming to help um, uh, weed and help with the rain garden. So next slide. But why we're here tonight is because of the erosion, and here are 2 pictures of the parking lot. I think almost everybody who goes there, they park their cars and they'll immediately see how the grassy area is shrinking back towards the parking lot. Next slide. And then, of course, there's the coastal bank and pathways that go around Fort Pickering. And we started this grant, applied for the grant in 2023. And in 2024, we had several storms, and this is going to happen with climate change. The storms are more erratic. We're going to get a nor'easter perhaps on Thursday, but that winter, the 2024 winter, we got a lot of south and southeast storms that eroded the bank here. Next slide. So the city actually started in FY24 with a one-year grant, and during that time we did a survey, we did the wetland resources, and began the historical investigation. And now the city has a 2-year grant, and we're coming up to June 30th, 2025, which will be the end of the first year, and then we will be continuing this. This year we're doing design and permitting. Okay, next slide. And I believe it goes over to John now, please.
Hi, I'm John Kelly. I'm a principal investigator for the Public Archaeology Laboratory. And because of the funding and the permitting involved in the project, it's subject to review by the Massachusetts Historical Commission, or MHC, for its potential to affect historic properties. So we came on board and to sort of determine what resources were in the project area and what could potentially be affected that the MHC will need to know about. And we started that work with a historic and cultural assessment for the project, where we kind of reviewed the history of Winter Island Park and Winter Island in general, and got a handle on sort of what resources within the project area have the potential to be affected by work for the project. Next slide, please. And the first one is Native American resources. Recent investigations on Winter Island at the Plummer campus, just north of the park, have shown that Winter Island was occupied by Native people for the last 10,000 years. Most more intensive occupations happening in what archaeologists refer to as the woodland period, about 2,000 years ago to just before European colonists show up. What you can see here is some of the materials that we found at the Plummer campus: stone tools, fire pit features, things like that. And basically the results from that site, which is the most substantial site on Winter Island, and from sites on Salem Neck, indicate that Native people were sort of repeatedly occupying the area so they could target the shellfish beds in the coves along the island. So it was a place of sort of intense habitation. And the work at the Plummer site kind of couldn't find the site boundaries because it kind of extends up to the property boundaries. So we think that that site might continue into the park if there's any undisturbed areas. And it might link to a couple of other known sites on the side of the park near the Coast Guard station that are outside of the project area. And the other thing we know about this is that workmen at Fort Pickering did unearth a Native American burial when they were doing renovation work in the fort in the 1860s during the Civil War. So there is a sort of strong potential for Native American resources to be present in the project area in any undisturbed locations. Next slide. And then the big one is Fort Pickering itself. It's one of the oldest surviving fort sites in Massachusetts. It was first built in the 1640s, and it was enlarged at various points in time, most notably in the 1790s, and then again during the Civil War. And we know from a prior survey done in 2003 in the park that there are buried remains from the 18th century and the 19th century within the fort that could be significant and have the potential to get impacted by the project. So that was one that we flagged for more investigation. Next slide, please. So as where we're at right now for our ongoing work for the project, we submitted the results of our assessment to Mass Historical Commission, and we recommended that they follow National Park Service guidelines for the rehabilitation of historic properties. And because of that prior survey indicating potentially significant archaeological resources in the project's limit of work, we recommended what's called an archaeological site examination survey for the work areas for the project. That survey, which, you know, on the left you see photos of similar work happening, it'll give us an idea of exactly what archaeological resources are present and whether or not they are significant and need to be considered as part of a treatment plan or something like that. So where we're at there is we've submitted our permit application to conduct that investigation to Mass Historic. We're waiting to hear back on that. And at the same time, PAL's architectural historians have been doing additional architectural survey work. They completed additional and more up-to-date documentation of Fort Pickering, and they just today submitted an updated inventory form for the fort to Mass Historic with the results of that additional documentation. So we're hoping to get out there to do our field work for the archaeology work in the third quarter of this year. And that's it for me, I think.
All right, thank you, John. I can take it from here. Good evening again. My name is Ian Peach. I'm the Director of Design at Wilkinson Ecological Design. We are an ecological restoration design build company that's based on the Cape, and we work along all coastal Massachusetts and now Maine, as well as the islands. I wanted to just take a quick moment to give you a sense of the type of work we work on. We're very coastal focused. That's where our expertise are, and our expertise are also with ecological restoration. So we're often working with public or private landowners, assessing their sites for things like invasive plants and opportunities for native plant community restoration. Our other primary vein of work is in coastal stabilization or coastal resiliency. Words you may have heard or may come up this evening is living shoreline or nature-based solutions, where we're looking at coastal areas, accounting for sea level rise, and looking at how to make these coasts more resilient with all the growing tensions that affect them. To do that, and I'll introduce some examples of the kinds of materials and place-based interventions we use, but they're very leveraged to think about using native plants and plant communities that will thrive and best adapt with coastal change. So we're a team that works design build. We're used to thinking about these in terms of design, thinking about them and how we permit them, and also ultimately we often have a role in the construction, so we're able to get a lot of understanding by working on projects for the long term. And one big takeaway from ecological restoration, it's all about being patient. It's a little bit of a longer game. You take some time to assess, as Barbara articulated, where we worked with this team in 2024 to really understand the issues, understand the data, and then we work from there through a design process and then do an initial act of restoring, but really it's not done. There's ongoing maintenance, care, and stewardship. And that's something we've been, starting where we are in the design process now, working with this team to talk about both how there'll be initial acts to help create better coastal resiliency at the park. And there are some specific areas I'm going to point out in our part of the presentation, but also talking about how there's these initial moves and then there's ongoing care. And that really is the name of the game in coastal areas, coastal communities, where you have these tensions of public use, awesome resources, and a little bit degraded native plant communities. So trying to bring back ecological health, bring back that integrity, get a more stabilized and resilient coast, but also keeping in mind those programmatic and awesome uses that people enjoy the park And definitely a very interesting part of this project is, as John articulated, with the historical resources. So I'll go on and speak a little bit more about a couple of the areas, a little bit as an overview, and then finish by talking about some of the types of, I call them interventions, but just imagine something you're going to do in a coastal area to help protect and add more resilience. So next slide, please. So this is just an overview, numbered 1 through 4, parking lot edge, southern shoreline, the headland, and Waikiki Beach. These are the titles we're using, carrying through our documents, and these are the primary areas. At this moment in the design, they're a little bit generalized, so showing with that green overlay areas we've, through that assessment process, have deemed a priority or have definite need to either protect from erosion, work on restoring native plant communities and invasive plant management, and definitely bring in that coastal intervention or that stabilization measure to that area to help protect the resource and make it more resilient. So the first one I'll speak to just a little bit is the parking lot edge, and we can go to the next slide. All right, so looking here, you can see in the upper corner is just a little bit more of a detailed view with the aerial and a general overlay. And the reason we're showing that first parking space and down to the water, as Barbara showed with a photo very quickly, anybody who's been here can see, and the data and the site shows it as well, this is a rapidly eroding edge on the parking lot. In photo 1 is really the base of that gazebo, all the way down at the southern, where that one marker is, the southern part of the aerial of the plan. And you can see how the gazebo itself is being undermined. And photo 2 and 3 are just looking in 2 different directions, that this is a continuous condition across this edge. And so for the parking lot edge, in terms of things we found, and you're going to hear some of these things repeated because they're common conditions which make sense, and there are some similarities in how there may be solutions. So we have a minor invasive plant population here of Asiatic bittersweet, and you have a really just a non-native, very shallow rooted grass strip with that rapidly eroding, falling off edge on the seaward face. We do have some compaction as well. So what we'd be looking at here is kind of a multi-pronged approach. It's the area maybe where there's the most thinking around how is this can still be a successful and usable programmatic space as it's used now, but also increase that resiliency. So things like gaining a little bit more elevation from protection of storm surge, things like bringing in and restoring with native plants that'll be much deeper rooted and more salt tolerant, anticipating more of these storm surges and more sea level rises and protecting from some of that coastal flooding. And that would be part of that native plant restoration. So there would be an initial intervention to help set up a situation that will be more resilient to the forces of the coast. And then ideally, the native plants are the ones that are doing the work, along with a structural solution on the leading edge. And I'll show you some examples like that after we go through the areas. So maybe I'll move on to the next area. Next slide, please. So this is what we're calling the southern shoreline. And these photos are some of the first photos we got from Barbara or similar areas, some of the first places we looked at on site, and were just obvious examples of really exacerbated erosion, where the soils are almost always exposed and these higher intensity precipitation events really just running those soils right off. We also have a condition in this area where there is a revetment, or if you want to think of it differently, just rocks placed as some measure of coastal armoring or coastal buffering. And really their elevation and how they're performing with the data we can see and with the effects on the site, they are getting overtopped in areas. And once they get overtopped, that system itself gets undermined, and especially that base of the bank, I call the toe of the bank, that base of the bank gets hit by storm surge. And then you can see, like in that photo number 3, all of a sudden you've already had erosion on that bank, and then it's being impacted by storm surge at the base, and you get slumping. So these things really, one by themselves, maybe you're hanging on by a thread, but once you get this combination of forces, that's where we really have to think to the future with coastal resilience solutions. I also want to mention here, and it'll be a common theme in what I'm speaking to this evening, is invasive plant management. This is one of the areas where we're seeing Asiatic bittersweet, sycamore maple, shrub honeysuckle, multiflora rose, and other state-listed invasive plant species. And most of those species, if not all of them, are documented really to have quite superficial root systems. And I'll speak to this a tiny bit more at the end. And although you may say, oh, it looks like there's plants growing there, they really are either becoming a monoculture and you're losing that biodiversity, but even just plant function and structure of the root masses, you're getting less benefit than you would with some really nice deep-rooted fibrous native plants or a more diverse maritime shrubland in these areas. So when we look at a location like this, we're thinking about managing the invasive plants, we're thinking about stabilizing the bank and seeding it with a biodegradable material that actually holds the soil after any removal. We're also thinking about how to stabilize that base and that toe that I mentioned, because if the toe is moving, you're losing a lot of the bank above. So the 3 would work together, and the toe itself would also have or the base would have a planting logic. So at the end, you're looking ideally at something after multiple years where parts of it have biodegraded, and you're looking at a healthy plant community, and that's what's doing most of the work. But there are definitely some specific things that are a little bit more intensive to plants that I'll speak to. You'll see me a little bit later on speak about fiber rolls, which are a coir-based product, and other biodegradable materials that with some of our special techniques that we've learned over the years and trialed and refined are wonderful ways to stabilize banks while you're getting those plant communities reestablished. So that's you'll see some really graphic examples of that to kind of get it visually in your mind. But that's what we found at the southern shoreline as a brief overview. Can move on to the next, please. So then the headland, moving around. If you've walked on top, there's some obvious channels where stormwater and erosion has kind of picked up, and once it had a way to go, it just has exacerbated. So one of the first things we looked at was more of like an acute, like, okay, how can you go in and just solve those areas? But what you have going on at the headland, like I mentioned on the prior area, is a similar condition where shown in photo 2 and 3, where you have Asiatic bittersweet, shrub honeysuckle, multiflora rose, plants that become a tangle of invasive plants. And although it looks like the surface of the soil is being covered and not eroding, if you look closer, these plants are very superficial and they're actually not doing a great job at protecting the stability of the bank. So one thing we've looked at this area is a close look at the plant communities and how that could be restored as a long-term way to protect the stability of the bank. And again, in this area, shown in photo 3, where you see those boulders and stones at the bottom of the photo, just above that is what we call a scarp, or an area where we've seen storm surge and waters regularly enough eat away at the soils and not allow plants to establish and actually create a concave shaped erosion at the base of the bank. What that leads to is a slump, further erosion, the bank slides down, it impacts access on the pathway at the top. So this area of thinking about resiliency and potential interventions would be a multi-pronged approach likely, looking at the base of the bank, looking at the plant community, and also doing some hyper-focused interventions and regrading around the on that photo one, those channels that have formed. And ideally, again, it's a long-term process, but it's to set up certainly greater ecological integrity of this coastal area, but also protection of the resource and protection of the access above it, ideally. All right, I'll move on to the next. All right, this is a Waikiki Beach. The photos here definitely tell a lot as well. If you're familiar with the park and you see photo 2 and the pathway down, one of the very first things we looked at here is how stormwater is conveying. And by stormwater, you really have two types. There's the type that's coming, as you would expect, from storms in the sky, but we also have a source that's more point source right nearby, where we even just have an outdoor shower that runs down and is causing erosion. So there would be some potential micro adjustments to just protect the access, the entrance where it's getting the most root use and how that connects. Because certainly, although it's kind of low-hanging fruit, that exacerbates the overall resiliency and ability of this to be a beautiful place to visit and for it to be there and not be eroding away. But if you turn to the right, or this plan view of the aerial is north-south, so if you were going east, there's also on that side a revetment, an older style, but so just to bring it, not use a different term, just picture large stones stacked as a coastal buffering structure, a CES, a coastal engineering structure. And when that was built and the elevation it's built and where we are with sea level rise, and that 100-year storm is certainly not 100 years now, that is also seeing overtopping. Directly behind that is an existing critical pathway of access up high, shown in photo 3. So again, a similar story I'm telling here is that it's a multi-pronged approach where we have the invasive plants to manage, the native plants to restore. This one has a unique minor focus on stormwater management. And then we'd be looking very closely at how to work with that toe to protect it, as you can see in photo 1, from all those exposed soils and to have a better buffer to that increased elevation of storm surge that this area of the park is seeing. So that's, as you can see, I think hopefully you see that there's kind of a common mantra to each of these multi-pronged approaches that will work together. But let's make it, I think, a little bit more real by going to the next slide. And I can show you in these axonometric projections the kinds of coastal stabilization options we are working with, or interventions is the word I mentioned. And again, sometimes referred to as living shorelines, sometimes as nature-based solution, or just coastal stabilization. But the commonality in all of these is they're primarily or completely biodegradable. And one of the wondrous products that's used is a coir-based product, so like a weave, and that starts with an erosion control blanket. That's actually something that can be used across project sites with the right seeding and planting to get you that coastal bank stabilization after maybe initial active removal of invasive plants. It's something that biodegrades in 12 to 18 months, but at that point, the seed and the plants are starting to do the work. So that's kind of at the most minor realm, but all has an application almost everywhere. If you move directly below that to the coir sand envelope, we were just looking at like Waikiki Beach. I think we may do something more substantial than this, but that was definitely in our design process. We were assessing these different types of options and alternatives. And a coir sand envelope is actually a similar coir-based material, a different, tighter, more substantial weave that gets nourished with compatible sand for that coastal resource and planted, for example, with American beach grass or appropriate native species. And again, it's that buffer at the base and the toe, setting up a condition to set in motion those native plant communities. A coir sand-filled envelope does not last as long, certainly, as these next two that I'm going to speak to, but it can be an appropriate measure that will set in motion a better future with native plants. And the last two are more specifically the most well positioned in conjunction with erosion control blanketing types of options that we're looking at now. And that's a fiber roll array or a reinforced fiber roll lifts. And you may have seen these before, but we've really perfected ways of working with them and anchoring them and constructing them to exact elevations to really get the maximum benefit out of them. So these are designed very specifically to elevations and slope, and they're located on the bank to support the toe. They're often nourished with that compatible sediment. They're often planted between the rows, and they're often part of a planting design above it, so it works continuously. So these fiber rolls, again, much more stability in the quartz sand envelope. They're very well anchored every 2.5 feet on center, deep into the bank, and they create that stability at the base of the coastal bank. The reinforced lifts, just the same story as the fiber rolls. We're just combining something that's more reinforced behind them using heavily compacted compatible sediments wrapped in another biodegradable material that we are anchoring through. So those fiber rolls in the most areas with the most potential for storm energy or velocity in terms of wave action. And these are definitely the metrics and the numbers we're studying very closely on site. These types of interventions or coastal stabilization options are what we'd be using with that invasive plant management, with that native plant restoration to set in motion a more resilient future across all these different coastal bank situations. So I just thought that slide gives a little bit more of a picture, but let's go one more just to see an actual photograph. So when I'm talking about erosion control blankets, you can see our crew on a quite large bank, but that blanket's been laid down. It's double staked and tied with biodegradable untreated stakes and wooden, jute rope, and then planted into. So that's something often in an upper bank or areas that are not going to get wave action or storm energy. Then you see a photograph of that actual fiber roll with that tight netting on it and plants actually plugged right into it. So that's these rolls come in 10-foot lengths and they're installed directly on site to very specific elevations and planted in their upper areas, and then often nourished with that compatible sand, as I mentioned. So often, and that helps protect it, I should say, from UV, from it degrading too fast in the elements. And the sand is also a buffer to those occasional storm surges. And then another reason really is working with a coastal bank. One of the things a coastal bank does is give sediment to the surrounding coastal area. So we don't want to lock it all up. We want this still to perform and behave with as much ecological integrity while still bringing benefits of resilience and stability. And then the last part that does not totally biodegrade, so I did leave that one part, but is very critical and where we bring these to the next level to be able to handle some of these more coasts that have more energy coming at them are the duckbill or helical anchors. These are tied in either threaded deeply into the bank, or a duckbill goes in and anchors back, and we're able to get quite a lot of tension, like I said, every about 2 to 3 feet all the way down the array. And these arrays can be, 150 feet. I mean, we've built them hundreds and hundreds of feet continuously. So I know these axons or these images are just a slice, but you can picture that they can work on quite a long coastal scale as well, and well anchored throughout. So the last thing, we can go to the last slide. I appreciate everybody sticking with me here. Are just quickly with the native plants and the rooting logic, because I kept saying the same thing about invasive plant management and the value of native plants. Well, native plants have a huge value in terms of biodiversity, their connection to the species that rely on them. They can have, other values like aesthetics, and different ecosystem services. But to focus on one, on the far left, you can see a shrub honeysuckle with that basically foot and a half surficial root system. And then we're moving into a maritime shrub like bayberry that's really salt tolerant and adapted and has evolved to have a nice deep wide, you can see how its root system goes much wider root system to anchor into the bank. And then doing a lot of this awesome work of really working with these systems are some of these native grasses that would likely be part of this project, with the little blue stem and switchgrass, for example, down to 8, 10, even deeper depending on the context. Also American beach grass, which is much more of a horizontal runner. It works in these systems well. So we like to leverage the power of plants and what they're already evolved to do with these biodegradable materials, with really thoughtful design process and data, knowing the right elevations. And we found these things working together make the most resilient coastal banks while still holding up a strong ecological integrity. So just wanted to show you this root diagram and the value of those deep-rooted native plants. So that's where we are now with WED. We're right in the middle of, and pushing forward at the end of this cycle into permitting with designs of this nature and of this ilk, obviously further refined and further articulated. But I wanted to give everybody an opportunity tonight just to get a sense of what we mean by these nature-based solutions and kind of native plant-focused coastal stabilization. So thank you. And I think next is Barbara's going to jump in on.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara.
Thank you, Ian and John, for setting the context for the Winter Island project. It's a big project. It's nature-based solutions, as Ian has well defined. And in order to do this, we do have to go through permitting. We're preparing the MEPA right now. MEPA stands for the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, and it requires any project that is state funded, which this is with the Coastal Zone Management Coastal Resiliency Grants. And there are other thresholds. For example, some of it's in the velocity zone. So there are different thresholds that we meet, and we are preparing the documents for MEPA now. And the purpose of MEPA is to make it an open process. It's open to the public. It's a study, it's for disclosure, and it's also looking at ways to mitigate a proposed project. In this case, we're doing all good things. It's all environmentally to the benefit of the environment. So I think we're going to hopefully go through this quite quickly. But it is a public process, and comments are encouraged by citizens, and we'll get comments from state and local agencies as well. So that's what we'll be ready to do by June 30th. And then after that, we'll go to the Conservation Commission for an order of conditions. There'll be a consultation with the Salem Historic Commission. And the parking lot is on filled tidelands, believe it or not. And so that requires a Chapter 91 license for filled tidelands. And that is a state process as well. We don't believe there's any federal permitting that we will need to do, because all the work will be above mean high water and above the annual high tide. Next slide. So here's a picture, a historic picture from the 1930s. That's an image from the streets of Salem. It's the original earthworks of Fort Pickering. And what we see is one lone tree out there, maybe one shrub. And so next slide. What happens when you look the other way after you've taken all the vegetation out is these days now you tend to get invasive species. And so we've been talking about it all evening. This is the Asiatic bittersweet. We've got the honeysuckle in there. And so as you go to the next slide, you can see that there is a lot of work to uncover Fort Pickering. This was done in 2012. Maybe somebody on the call knows who did this. I just happened to must have been there and took these photos. You can see that they're cutting away at the bittersweet, the honeysuckles, multiflora rose, and glossy and common buckthorn. But they come back. So we will, next slide, we will be out there again. And I want to thank the Bittersweet Sweet Warriors or the Bittersweet Brigade and others for joining in and cutting the vines that wrap around the trees and any native shrubs that are there or trees, and they can actually strangle them or kill them. So next slide. As part of any of the coastal zone management grants, state grants, there's the community outreach and engagement, which is a very critical, important part of this. We've already begun last year in 2024. We did a walk out at Fort Pickering. All the pictures on the right are from that beautiful day. And we had historical architect Rick Detweiler join us, and the information that he provided is on the public input page for this project. So if you're interested in seeing the history and some of the documents and photos that he or maps and images that he collected for us and showed us that day, they're available still. We also created a brochure that's, if you go to the office at Winter Island, you can still pick them up there. And it tells about the project, and it has the QR code to the public input page where anyone can view the pamphlet in multiple languages. So that's a very important resource. We will continue doing outreach for the rest of this year, FY20 till June 30th, and then into 2026. The next public meeting we will have is June 10th. It's a Wednesday. We're going to meet at 4 o'clock and walk and talk and explore in person, experientially, what you heard tonight. We'll look at the parking lot edge, we'll look at the Fort Pickering and the headland area, and talk about invasive plants. The other thing that we have planned, but it's to be determined, is that Salem Sound Coast Watch in this grant said what we would help educate people about invasive plants and begin some cutting. And so if you're on this call and you're interested in joining Salem Sound Coast Watch out at Fort Pickering, let me know. You can send me an email, barbara.warren@salemsound.org. I believe there's a feedback on the public input, but that's the best way, is to just call Salem Sound Coast Watch. Next slide. Yeah, and now it's a perfect time for Q&A. So Neil, do you want to come back on and tell people how they do this?
Yeah, if people have questions, they can use the Q&A function on Zoom. It's at the bottom of your screen. You just click on there and you can type in your questions. We can wait a few minutes if there are questions. I'm not sure if there are. As we're waiting for that, in the meantime, I think I'll just want to just mention, if you haven't already appreciated it, I mean, nothing is ever simple with these projects, but if you may have gotten a sense of all the moving parts and all of the different partners involved. And so as a city, we're just incredibly appreciative of all the partners that you've heard from tonight, and also CZM. They aren't just funding the project, they also consult and provide an immense amount of guidance to the city and to the project team throughout. They're part of the team, and also, of course, Barbara and Salem Sound Coast Watch, just keeping all these plates spinning, and making sure that we're hitting all these marks for all these permits is just immensely helpful and necessary to try to to do something like this. You would think restoring pathways wouldn't be that complicated, but it really is, especially on an
It
historical
really is,
site.
yes.
And also the city team, our DPS, the folks who take care of the park, our preservation planner and our conservation agent as well, are really just vital members of the team.
No, not
Not
seeing.
not seeing any questions.
So the one thing I would add is that this was meant to be an overview of what we're doing now and what we're ideas that we're exploring. And Wilkinson Ecological Design is working on developing the concepts. And then, of course, we're going through the MIPA. So we're waiting to get comments back there. But we will have other public meetings where we sort of get into more of the details of what we'll be doing. Okay.
Right. Well, I think not seeing any questions. If folks did have questions and were challenged with the Q&A function or for any other reason, please feel free to reach out to either Christian team or myself at the Sustainability and Resiliency Department in the city, or Barbara. You can go to the public input page for more information on the project. So hopefully if you do have questions, you can reach out to us then and just stay tuned. And we look forward to updating you more on this project as we continue.
And I hope to see you on June 10th, and I hope it's a wonderful summer day. We'll meet at the gazebo on June 10th. It'll be on the Salem Sound Coast Watch calendar, and it will be on the city's input page as well. So thank you for coming.
Thank you all. Yeah, have a great night,
Spending your
everyone.
evening with us. Thank you.